Well, this is a wonderful, wonderful thrill for us here at USF Sarasota Manatee to see so many people come to celebrate the extraordinary accomplishments and brilliance of our students. So I'm really thrilled to see you all here. I'm Judy Sedgman. I'm the director of the Institute for Public Policy and Leadership. This is our very first program that features students, but as many people in the audience have asked me if we're going to do more of these, the answer, looking at all of you, is of course, because we exist to bring the university closer to the community and share the gifts that we are so fortunate to have here with people in our community, and also receive your wisdom when we have discussion. So we're going to look forward to this. I want to give full credit for this program to the person who will pick it up as soon as I sit down, who is Dr. Jane Rose. She's the chairman of the College of Arts and Sciences, and Dr. Rose is a tireless advocate for our students, as well as for literacy and for bringing uplifting scholarly work to our community. She's somebody that I have come to admire very much. This program was initiated by her. IPPL was thrilled to be a partner with the College of Arts and Science to present it. And so it's a great honor for me to get started by just starting the video. There's just a little bit, some of you may have seen this, a little introduction to the author, and then we're going to launch right into Dr. Rose's presentation.
I was inspired to write The Book Thief because of just memories of sitting in my kitchen when I was a kid, hearing stories my parents told me, and it was like we were all glued to our seats, hearing stories of bombings and getting up out of the ground, out of the bomb shelters in Munich and in Austria. There was one day when my mother heard a noise. She was 6 years old, and she heard this noise from the main street, and she ran with the other kids, and they thought it would be cattle coming down the main street of this village where she lived. But it wasn't cattle, it was people. And there was an old man who couldn't keep up. He was staggering over the road. And it was a teenage boy who went into his house, got a piece of bread, and gave it to this man, who fell to his hands and knees, grabbed him by the feet, and or grabbed him by the ankles, and cried into his feet, thanking him. And then a soldier came, ripped the bread away, and whipped the old man for taking it, and then chased the boy and beat him to the ground and whipped him for giving him the bread. And it was that story that really inspired the book, I think, because on one hand you've got pure beauty, which is the boy giving the bread, and on the other you've got pure destruction, which is the soldier doing what he did. And you bring those two things together and you've got humans and what we're capable of. And so I heard stories like that, stories of my dad not wanting to go to Hitler Youth, and people who didn't want to hang their flags in their windows, and I thought, I'm going to write about those people. I wanted to write a 100-page novella, and it just turned into a book. I got a bit carried away, and it turned into a book that was a bit longer, and a book that now just means everything to me. Well, I decided to use death as the narrator of the book purely because there's that expression that war and death are like best friends. So I thought, who better to tell this story set in Nazi Germany, because death was everywhere at that time and place. And I thought, well, what's the opposite of this all-powerful death? And I thought, vulnerable death. What if death was afraid of us? What if death was haunted by humans? And that was the big question, that was the breakthrough, because I thought, not only is it unexpected, it makes sense as well, because death is on hand to see all of the terrible things humans do to each other. And I realised what the book was about at that point, and it was trying to find beautiful moments in an ugly time. Probably the most asked question about the book when it comes to where should this sit on the bookshelf is this a young adult book or is it an adult book? I just think, well, I didn't sit down to write a good young adult book or a good adult book. I really tried to write someone's favourite book, The other thing to remember is I thought nobody would read the book. You know, a 500-page book set in Nazi Germany, the narrator's death. You know, you think, how do you recommend that to your friends? I thought, no one's going to read this. I thought, well, I might as well do this exactly how I want to do it and follow my own vision for the book and write in exactly the style I want. That's when it really took off. So I think half of writing a book is just forgetting that there's even a world that exists beyond the book. To be a writer, I think, has nothing to do with being published in a lot of ways. If a ray of light came out of the sky and said to me, all right, your next book will never see the light of day. It won't be published, you won't be paid a cent, nobody will ever read it. And the question is, would I still write the book? And the answer is definitely yes. And that's what makes me write my next book, knowing that that is true. For me, writing should be fun, and it should be like you can play with words. And I think that's what I like most about writing, is just playing with words and getting a sense that an author is enjoying writing and just having fun with it and playing a little as well.
Good afternoon and welcome. And I am Jane Rose, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to join us for what we're describing as a literary salon at USF Sarasota Manatee to discuss Mark Zusak's book, The Book Thief. While our host presenters are taking their places on the stage, I'd like just to say a few words. First of all, I would like to thank METV for taping this event, so you all will be able to see it over again at some other time. Next, I would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you to attend 2 more of the One Book events as we're reaching the end of this exciting period in Sarasota while we're all sharing the reading experience. Coming up soon, February 16th at 3 p.m. in Jane Bancroft Cook Library, Dr. Helen Fagan will present a critique of The Book Thief. I don't know if I said that's at 3 p.m. Then on February 21st at 6:30 p.m. in Sarasota High School Auditorium, we'll be having the climactic event, which will feature Dr. Matthew McClendon talking about the art of the period and Nazi Germany's response to it. And also the feature of the evening will be an interview with Mark Zusak via Skype technology. So I hope you will plan to attend those events. I also want to take this opportunity to share with you another upcoming event on March 28th at 10:30 a.m., again in the Cook Library. USF Sarasota Manatee will be hosting a talk by Paul Shapiro of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and you all are invited to attend that talk. Finally, I want to let you know about that it will be soon time for you to help us select the One Book selection for next year. Currently, there is a committee at work trying to narrow numerous nominations for books down to a slate of 6 nominees for next year's selection. Then these nominees will be posted online. You will be informed of them through the Sarasota County Libraries, and you will be invited to vote either online or in paper for your selection. And that selection process will go on throughout the spring. So you will have time if you want to do some quick reads before you cast your vote. You should have time to do that. But that's how the book is selected. It's a democratic process that is seeking as much input as possible. So if you've found this enjoyable, we hope you will have your say for next year. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to the 7 hosts for today's discussion. The core of the group began as 5 seniors, and I'm talking about undergraduate classmen seniors, who are students of literature and history at USF Sarasota Manatee. They volunteered to participate, and I want you to understand that we're talking about students who are carrying a full load, and actually all of these students also happen to be students in our honors program. So this means that in addition to their full load, at this particular semester, they are all producing honors theses. So they've got more than enough on their plate, but they're dedicated scholars in the making and demonstrated scholars' approach when I discussed this with them and said, sure, I'll take that on. So they're here today. They are Jennifer Lopez, and Jennifer is an English major and honors student. After she graduates, which I believe is on tap for next December, she intends to enroll in a graduate program specializing in medieval literature. Paul Dunder. Paul is a history major and honors student. He's completing his bachelor's degree, and after that, he hopes to attend Columbia Law School in New York City. Very specific sites. Brittany Stamey is an English major and honors student who also has high aspirations. They're not quite as focused at this moment as Paul's, but she is currently researching graduate programs with plans to pursue a master's degree in English after she graduates this summer. Albert Richard is an English major and honors student. After his graduation, which I believe is on tap for summer, or May? Summer, okay. He plans to work with a humanitarian agricultural organization in the Republic of Kazakhstan, and then after that, he plans to seek a law degree with the ultimate goal of being involved in the United States government service. Nikki Ummel is a double major. One was not quite enough for her, so she pursued a complete degree in English education and also a Bachelor of Arts degree in straight English, as well as being an honors student. She plans to pursue graduate work in educational policy with the hopes of a career in designing alternative education models for America's schools. Go, girl. This group decided that it would be a good idea to augment the core by expanding our age demographic, both upwards and downwards. So from there, we brought in Chloe Sweetman. Chloe is a senior at Manatee High School, and she's currently in the final angst of deciding what college to attend in order to pursue her twin passions of anthropology and creative writing. And Linda Paul, who is a student at the Lifelong Learning Academy here on our campus, and she pursues her passion for literature in retirement from a career with Girl Scouts of the United States of America. Let's give them a hand. Before we begin, I wanted to describe to you kind of our design for this event. Each of our conversation hosts has prepared a brief presentation talking about an aspect of the book that they personally found interesting. When they conclude their presentations, they're going to invite the audience to respond with their thoughts on that given topic, and we will just sort of just let that conversation happen. We have a microphone that can pass in the room for you to speak into it, but also I will be up here, and after I listen to your comment, I will repeat it for the room. Unfortunately, we do have to keep track of time because everybody will be hungry for dinner at some point. So while we hope we stimulate conversation, I'm also going to have to moderate conversation to keep things going. But if you felt stifled and with a response that you wanted to have with one of the speakers, I'm sure they would be glad to stay afterward and continue the discussion with you. So without further ado, the order of the talks, they're seated in order, but that means that Paul is going to begin, and I'll turn it over to Paul.
Being a history student, I decided to talk about history. So my topic that I'd like to discuss today is the historical setting of this book. Of course, it was set in Nazi Germany during the war. And a lot of times when we hear about this period, we hear about Hitler and his henchmen. But sometimes what's forgotten is what happened to the everyday people and what happened in their everyday life. And for me, I thought that this book really exposed the social history of this time period. A definition: social history is the study of regular people and their methods of coping with everyday life. And I thought I really found this in this book. When you study these people in this story, one of the common themes that appear is separation. Not only did the people have to deal with family separation, they were also separated from their freedoms to think and act for themselves. One thing I found interesting, the main antagonist of the story is Hitler and Nazism. The political climate of this country is the villain of the story. Throughout the novel, the people who are not strong supporters of Nazism are in fear of being taken away by them. In the town square, after the book burning, Liesel asks her papa if they were responsible for taking away her mother. When Max arrives at Himmel Street, Hans tells Liesel that if she tells that they're hiding this Jewish person in their basement, they will take away Rosa and himself. After feeding the Jewish man on the street, Hans is sitting in his kitchen just waiting for his punishment, and his punishment is being taken away by them. The main adversary inside the Huberman household is the Nazi Party. The party is not there to help them, they are there to intimidate them. Then this is what the Nazis wanted. They wanted the people to be frightened. A good frightened person was less likely to cause trouble, and one of the punishment for causing trouble was being separated from your family. Therefore, family separation was a key theme in the novel. One example of this was between Hans and Hans Jr. Hans Jr. was the robotic Nazi enthusiast, and he held this hostility towards his father because he didn't have the same political views as his son. His father's kindness towards the Jewish people and his reluctance to join the party really irked his son. Even Liesel was the recipient of his wrath when she's sitting there reading the book, and he says that she should be reading Mein Kampf, not what she's reading. When he got sick of his father's attitude, he left, and we don't find out what happened to him. And this is not the only case that this family was separated because of the party. After the scene that he feeds the Jewish person, he's drafted into the army. Therefore, the family is separated again by Nazism. Liesel's family was also separated by Nazism. She blames the party for the breakup of her family. At the book burning, she comes to the realization that she will never hear from her mother again, and she blames Hitler for this. And she also blames the death of her brother on Hitler. And this is the scene that she denounces Hitler, and he says, well, in sort of a mean way, that you can't do that. And she blames the Nazism for breaking up her family. And these two families are not the only example. Max is taken away from his family to survive the regime. The Steiners lose their father because of not allowing their son to go to the special school. Frau Holz-Apfel loses one of her sons to the war, and as soon as the other son returns, he commits suicide because he can't live with the guilt. In this world, people can be separated because they don't believe in the Nazi doctrine, because they went against it, or because of their race, or because of the war. Not only did Nazism separate families, it attempted to separate people from freedom of thought. One way this was done is to separate knowledge and words from the people. At the book burnings have always been a popular way of doing this throughout history. Of course, the Nazis were not the first to have book burnings. I mean, it was very popular during the Reformation and stuff. Many people throughout history have thought it a good idea to get rid of knowledge and eliminate books. With the book burning on Munich Street, not all of the books burn. And there's the scene that she picks up the book, and it's the one single book there. And the author explores the idea of the unburnt book, the unabolished knowledge. In this story, the Nazis encouraged reading Mein Kampf. The idea is that words, books, knowledge should all come from the top authority, the Führer. Certainly an unburnt piece of Jewish literature would not have been accepted. The party strived to control the thoughts of people, but what happens when not all of the knowledge burns? In conclusion, I'd like to bring to attention the questions that the narrator asks on page 375. And this is the scene where he's describing the first air raid. And it's at the bottom of 375. And the narrator, Death, asks, did they deserve any better, these people? How many had actively persecuted others, high on the scent of Hitler's gaze, repeating his sentence, his paragraphs, his opus? Was Rose Herbermann responsible, the hider of a Jew? Or Hans? Did they all deserve to die, the children? These are interesting yet difficult questions that the author asks. Nazism affected everyone in Germany, and some may have deserved their fate, but many people did not. But the line is definitely blurred. In the struggle between people who supported Nazism and everybody else, there are many shades of gray. So my question is, did they deserve any better, these people?
Would anybody like to engage that question? Okay.
Thank you. Am I on? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm not sure I'm directly engaging your question, so you'll have to let me know. But what fascinated me when I read this book was that as being born a Jew, I have carried a lot of, we'll use the word hatred lightly, for Germans because of them all being a part of this and not doing anything. And what came out of this book for me was realizing how many Germans were forced into doing things, forced to be in the army, forced to do things that they didn't want to do. Mm-hmm. And I never really, until I read this book, had a compassion for what the German population was going through, what they were being bombed, how they were drawn into it. So in your question of whether they deserved it, who knows in the heart of anyone, whether they're there because they want to be there, or they're there to protect their own, or to protect their own, their own lives or their own. It's a very difficult question, and as I said, what the book did for me was open a piece of compassion for all people that I might have a judgment of, that are going through things that I'm so sure why they're doing it, when in reality, none of us really understand any of it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to engage that question? Then I think we'll move on.
I'd like to start with some facts and pretend that these are in bold. Some facts discovered by your presenter. Amazon.com has a total of 1,035 reviews of The Book Thief, currently as of about 2 hours ago. 866 people gave this book 5 stars. 97 people gave this book 4 stars. The remaining number, 72 people, gave this book 3 or 2 or 1 star. What interested me about the negative reviews was exactly what made people not like this book, because I loved it. I could not stop reading it. I devoured this book in a total of about 5 hours the first sitting, and I couldn't understand what made people dislike it. What I discovered overall, the people who chose to rate it a 3 or 2 or 1, was that they disliked Death as the main character, and they therefore also disliked his attitude. I have a long history of being fascinated by morbidity, so I loved Death, and I loved his attitude as well. I thought it was very interesting that these people who I looked at who reviewed this book on Amazon felt that he was cold and insensitive and even a little flat. I saw his writing style and his need to simplify the events of the story, his need to tell it in the most simple and pure and genuine way, to reveal something very simple and beautiful about Death himself. He's not responsible for the horror that he's seeing. He's not responsible for having to remove poor Rudy Steiner from his dead and broken body. He's not responsible for the horrors that he has to watch people suffer every day. And I think that his need to simplify the way that he tells the story shows that he has an enormous wealth of compassion for these people that he has to take from their broken and bleeding bodies and take them to somewhere that's probably going to be better than where they have been. I also think that it was interesting to choose Death as a narrator because of what it means for the reader. It's really difficult for a reader to sympathize with Death because we're not Death. We're human and we're fallible and we are mortal, and Death isn't. And Death is very clear about how he must survive by vacationing in colors, which I thought was really interesting, rather than having to look at the survivors who hurt him more than the people he's taking. He chooses to revel in the small and simple beauty of the world in which he finds himself. The colors of the sky, the way that it looks when even bad things are happening. The bombs are bursting, but he describes the sky as being chocolate, and he sucks on it. I mean, it's how he has to get on because of what he's seeing. The reason that he's telling the story I thought was even more interesting. Because he's not human, he can't comprehend how humanity can be both so incredibly beautiful to write a story the way that Liesl did and the way that Max did, and also to commit the atrocities that were occurring every day. Liesl's story is not the only book that he carries. He carries many others. This story, this book, could have been the story of any other one that he carries in what he calls his vast array of pockets. But he chooses Liesl's, and he calls it one of the small legion that he carries, each one extraordinary, each one an attempt, an immense leap of an attempt to prove to Death that we and our human existence are worth it. When I talked to some of the other panel presenters here, one of them in particular said that she really disliked the character of Death. She found that his attitude was a little snarky. And I love that word. It's a fascinating word. And what it kind of means is sort of ironic and clever and witty, which is what Death is. But like I've suggested, I think it is clever and witty because he's afraid. He's afraid to feel, he's afraid to become human because then he'll have to be in pain forever. We can end it, and Death says at some point that humans have the good sense to die. He can't. He's suffering the pain of seeing the lost and the broken and those that have, as he calls, beaten lungs and broken hearts, of what happens in the aftermath of the horror of life. This person that I was talking about who really disliked him also said that she didn't see any compassion in him. And I truly did. I felt that he was really, really very compassionate and empathetic, and he genuinely felt something, especially when he talks about taking the pilot who had died, who had crashed, and Liesel and Rudy went over. Rudy put a bear in with the pilot, and Death says, "I rescued him from the broken plane." He sees his mission as a labor of love because he's taking them away from the pain that other humans are causing to them and sending them somewhere that probably is better. I also found it very poignant, the description of how he deals with Rudy Steiner's death. And I'm going to quote here. "I carried him softly through the broken street with one salty eye and a heavy, deathly heart. With him I tried a little harder. He does something to me, that boy, every time. It's his only detriment. He steps on my heart. He makes me cry." And it's hard for me to read that without crying. That's pretty much all I had to say, was that this is a story of how Death tries to reconcile the incredible sadness and the incredible beauty that inhabits the human nature. I forgot my question. My question then comes from the discussion that I had with another presenter, and what I thought was perhaps the reason why she had found Death to be not a very nice character, and I had liked him, may have been a difference in our ages. No, don't take it personally. But because I had not experienced anything to do with the Holocaust. I'm not Jewish, and I don't know anyone who had any family members affected by this particular horrific event in history, and it's too remote for me. So I was wondering if anybody would like to comment on how they felt death should be perceived, and especially if you have any ideas about the age thing, I'd like to know.
I didn't like the book at all when I first started reading it. I thought it was very contrived. And I thought, what is this guy doing? You know, what is he trying to prove by having these short, choppy, you know, chapters and stuff like that? I always have to read to the end of a chapter, but I want to get my brain into it, I think, before the chapter is over. And I was very frustrated at first, and then after a while, I just couldn't stop reading it.
Yeah, I felt the same way.
Anybody have a less than rapturous response to the death narrator? Back here.
It seemed to me that part of the role of death is to take the story to a higher meaning, higher level. When Death expresses his interest in colors, he's showing that his world is one of essences. Color is a symbolic of essence. And when he goes around collecting from the humans who are dying, he's taking their souls. Well, what's the soul? One could assume it's the essence of that individual in leaving their body. The thing that perplexes him and that really raises a major question in the novel is his confusion as to what is the essence of humans. Is it the good? Is it the evil? And he can't really reconcile it, even though he sees the purest form of each in his going through the war at a time when there's so much to collect in terms of the essences of humans. But the context is a horrible one, and that especially emphasizes the question, what's the essence of human beings?
Yes, another thought of here.
I kind of enjoyed the book, but I felt that it was a problem in that evil was muted. The evil was very mild. The fact that crimes have been committed was very mild. The fact that everyone lived fairly normal lives. And the Jewish people who were there were only a kind of a sidebar within the whole story. And I guess that's my problem with it.
And I think that certainly is a question or a thread of conversation that may recur as we go forward, because I think that it is a response that a number of people have had. One more question or comment.
I also think it's very sad. There are some times when it was a relief to have death because people were so maimed and crippled and whatever was happening. And sometimes it was very difficult. Why should all these young people be dying? And I think poor Death got the blame by some readers. I could be wrong. I didn't blame him. I felt compassion for the poor guy or whatever he was. But I think people blamed him for the death.
Stimulating ideas, but this is where I'm going to need to move us forward, okay? But we will. Many of these talks will thread, upon each other as we go forward. And now Chloe Sweetman is going to talk.
On a slightly different note, my first impression of The Book Thief was that it was a love story. Despite the overarching themes of death and abandonment throughout the novel, the characters of the book band together around a hungry girl, starved of the nourishment of love, food, and belonging, but gifted with a silver tongue and a penchant for understanding the human soul. While reading this book, I found that most of the characters that surrounded Liesl were metafictional foils to her. To clarify, a foil is someone who's placed opposite the main character, to contrast their personality without wholly becoming the antagonist. As metafictional foils, I found the characters not only contrasted her, but mirrored some of Liesl's traits to enrich the text. The three most prominent men in Liesl's life, her foster father, Hans Huberman, her best friend and partner in crime, Rudy Steiner, and the ever-imaginative Jewish fist fighter, Max, were some of the best examples of characters that did both throughout the novel. Hans Huberman is the man who first draws Liesl from her shattered and walled state. He exudes the warm and silver light of understanding when he sees Liesl hanging on the gate of 33 Himmel Street. Hans is depicted as a common man with an uncommon love for fellow humanity. He personifies the normality of human error while indulging in the simple joys of life. Unlike his foster daughter, he wears his heart on his sleeve, needing little reason to go out of his way to be kind, be it giving bread to a starving Jew or teaching a frightened girl how to roll cigarettes on the bathroom floor. However, like Liesl, he struggles with the internal conflict of survival after his experiences in World War I. The estrangement of his son, Hans is also abandoned and left doubting his courage and strength. Rudy Steiner, on the other hand, distinctly lacks the warm graciousness that Hans so elegantly personifies. As Death describes it, Rudy Steiner was one of those audacious little bastards who actually fancied himself with the ladies. However, it is this rash and unchecked capacity for the unconditional love for his new neighbor that makes Rudy such a perfect match for Liesl, albeit his unique way of showing it. As our narrator commented, insane or not, Rudy was always destined to be Liesl's best friend, A snowball in the face is surely the perfect beginning to a lasting friendship. Together, he and Liesl relish in the feeling of stealing from the father nappers and word killers. Eventually, they both learn to give back, not just steal. Rudy, however, never learns to let go of his anger with Hitler, whereas I think Liesl comes to terms with what she can and cannot control. The man who Liesl can best compare with is Max. Unlike the other characters within the novel, Max flits in and out of a strange, wraith-like existence, not entirely real, as he chances the dark boxing ring in a round with the Führer, his hair like feathers of a caged bird. He walks an unusual line between reality and imagination, where only Liesl can reach him. To an extent, he is the embodiment of Liesl's escapism, and in others, he's the reason for it. She sees a man who, like her, has lost everything he has known and is unsure of how to pick up the pieces. He's the only character in the book, aside from Liesl, who creates his own words and finds the courage to pen them with unguarded sincerity. They find common ground in the power of words and the world they can create in the shadowy darkness of a basement illuminated by a dripping sun of friendship. Through each of these men, Liesl discovers a piece of herself and a piece of them, and she returns to the favor of helping them as they've helped her, as she sees them start to fall into their own depths of despair. So my question to you is, had Liesl met only one of these men, how would the outcome of The Book Thief been affected? The question was, had Liesl met only one of these three men, how would the outcome of The Book Thief been affected?
It couldn't exist without all of them because they each represented a facet of what the author was trying to talk about and what those relationships were. They each formed a particular tool in terms of talking about what her experience was and to explain her experience and enlarge her experience and to draw you into the experience.
We've got another one over here.
Yeah, I think I get what you're trying to say because Rudy let her be a child, and then she could be a daughter for Hans, and then she could have a connection to the larger world with Max. So that, as you said, without those three, she wouldn't be a character, and you couldn't have the book.
One behind.
I think perhaps I have a quote. I tend to do that in my book journal. I read it a long time ago, so I don't remember all the particulars. But on page 328, it says, "A small suggestion, or maybe there was a woman on Grandstrasse who now kept her library window open for another reason, but maybe that's just my being cynical or hopeful or both." So she's so developed by all the people that are around her, so she's cynical or hopeful or both.
Thank you, Zoe. Excuse me, Chloe. And now it is Linda's turn.
Well, no, that's not going to work. I found this to be a story of opposites. Courage and cowardice, love and hate, good and evil, brutality and kindness, friendship and enmity, death and survival, guilt and indifference, beauty and ugliness, and any number of opposites that you or I might name in an attempt to describe the qualities of another human being. Death, the narrator, tells us that I'm always finding humans at their best and worst. I see their ugly and their beauty, and I wonder how the same thing can be both. What Death is describing is the duality of humanity, or what I see as the human condition, or the nature of being human. In telling the story of Liesl and the people in her life at this particular place, in this particular time, Susak also is exploring what it means to be human. In the section A Long Walk to Dachau, Zusak makes the following observation. Once in a while, a man or a woman. No, they were not women and men. They were Jews, denoting their dehumanization. Later in the scene, Hans gives an elderly man a crust of bread. The Jew is then whipped and addressed as "you filth" and "you swine" by the Nazi soldiers transporting them. Hans is also whipped for his action, and Death notes, if nothing else, the old man would die like a human, or at least with the thought that he was a human. What does Death think made him human? Hans' kindness and compassion, the recognition by another person of his humaneness, or his own compassion in his sadness over watching Hans being whipped. Hans worries that he has brought attention to himself and that his actions may lead to the discovery of Max Vandenberg, the Jewish man they've hidden in their cellar. As a result, Max decides to leave and not put his family at further risk. When Hans declares himself an idiot for his actions, Liesel notes that "no, Papa, you are just a man." Max Vandenberg was the son of the man who saved Hans' life during the First World War. As a young man, he was a fist fighter and liked fighting. When he sees his uncle die of cancer, he asks, "Where's the fight? Where's the will to hold on? When death captures me, he'll feel my fist in his face." And in Max, we see the duality personified between his will to live and the guilt he carries as a survivor. When the Nazis came for his family, he says, "Never, I won't leave. If we all can't go, I won't go either." The narration tells us when he was pushed out by the rest of his family, the relief struggled inside him like an obscenity. Eventually, Max makes his way to Moltke and the Hubermans, and now he sat in a stranger's kitchen, asking for the help he craved and suffering the condemnation he felt he deserved. Max is not alone in his feelings. Michael Holzapfel, a neighbor of the Hubermans, also suffers the torture of his will to live and the guilt of his survival. He has survived as a soldier in Russia, where his brother died, and then he returned home. During an air raid, his mother refuses to go to a shelter, and he goes without her. At the shelter, he asks, "Tell me, Rosa, how can she sit there ready to die when I still want to live? Why do I want to live? I shouldn't want to, but I do." Later, Michael can no longer deal with his duality and hangs himself. Death tells us he killed himself for wanting to live. Rosa Huberman, Liesel's foster mother, is a wonderful study of the duality of humanity. We are told that Rosa Huberman had a face decorated with constant fury, and that she possessed the unique ability to aggravate almost anyone she ever met. But she did love Liesel. It involved bashing her with wooden spoons and words at various intervals. Among Frau Huberman's favorite words are Sau, Saumensch, Saukerl, and Arschblock. We learn that Sau means pig. Saumensch is an insult for women. Saukerl is an insult for men. An asshole is used for everyone. As offensive as these terms are, they also become terms of endearment between the characters as the novel progresses. Rudy and Liesel use them often when talking to one another. Rosa also berates her husband regularly regarding his work, what she sees as his lack of ambition, and wastes his time with accordion playing. In spite of her formidable exterior and assaultive behavior, Rosa does take in and care for Liesel and Max, and in the most revealing of her actions, mourns Hans when he is taken away. Liesel wakens one night to see Rosa Huberman was sitting on the edge of the bed with her husband's accordion tied to her chest. Liesel knew that for the next few days, Mama would be walking around with the imprint of an accordion on her body. This is the most vivid example of Rosa's caring or loving side. These are only a few examples of the duality of humanity I saw in this story, but for me, the most vivid. In his exploration of the characters as humans, Mark Zusak has provided us with a vivid illustration of the words I found in my synonym dictionary for the adjective human. Humane, kindly, sensitive, accessible, down to earth, earthy, vulnerable, flesh and blood, defenseless, unguarded, faulty, errant, and erring. Few are humane, many are vulnerable, and most are faulty. They are human, errant, and erring. And that was the parts that I found in this, was this focus on the opposite, and I would ask whether or not you agree.
Would anybody like to speak to their response of the mixed nature of humanity that we see in this novel?
In everything every one of us does, there is a duality. You know, we can one day be doing what's considered the right thing, and some days we're doing something that's considered wrong. And, you know, that is who we are as human beings. We are every moment in the duality of it. This book just brings it out perfectly. So just back to my original compassionate remark.
I thought it was interesting, though, that you could see that death was the final resolution of that duality, because there wasn't any discussion about some people going this way, some people going that way. So it was, in a sense, that was a hopeful note, that, you know, an acceptance of the fact that there's good and evil existing somehow side by side, and yet in some final resolution, that's the end of it.
Over here.
In your definition of erring, I think it didn't go far enough. I think there was a cruelty in this when you're being cruel, which goes further than erring. The cruelty of the town coming out every time the prisoners came by. After they saw it once or twice, they could have stayed home. They didn't. The fact that he was beaten. There were various examples in the book. I think her father was probably the most, not only caring, but was essential for her to become the person that she was, at least in this book. Without him, this book would not have had the basis to be created.
I thank you. We will move on. And I believe we up to Brittany.
Mine falls really well, after Linda, because I'm going to be talking about the power of words. First, positive power of words, and then second, negative. So that goes really well with hers. And then I'm going to close by talking a little bit about how the author personifies the words themselves, which is actually what got me interested in talking about this topic to begin with. I found it very interesting that he made them almost like entities in and of themselves. Actually, one of the quotes that she used, I was going to use as well, which is the bashing her with the word. So it's almost like they can be used as weapons or as things. So first, I think I'd naturally want to begin with Liesl if I'm going to be talking about the positive power of words, because to her, words become everything. And I have a quote I'd like to open with. When she came to write her story, she would wonder exactly when the books and the words started to mean not just something, but everything. Was it when she first set eyes on the room with shelves and shelves of them? Or when Max Vandenberg arrived on Himmel Street carrying handfuls of suffering and Hitler's Mein Kampf? Was it reading in the shelters, the last parade to Dachau? Was it the word shaker? So for Liesl, even before she knows what words mean, she carries around the grave digger's handbook, and she can't read it, but it's still something powerful to her. And then as she begins to be able to read with the help of Hans, it becomes even more and more powerful to her. And then she begins to understand how words can almost transfer power to the reader. And this is another quote. At times, Liesel wondered if she would simply leave the woman alone, but Ilse Hermann was too interesting, and the pull of the books was too strong. Once, words had rendered Liesel useless, but now she sat on the floor with the mayor's wife at her husband's desk. She felt an immense sense of power. It happened every time she deciphered a new word or pieced together a sentence. She was a girl in Nazi Germany. How fitting that she was discovering the power of words. And then for Hans, the power of words became a lot more literal. For him, he's literally saved by words during World War I. And this is a quote as well. The sergeant sighed. The captain needs a few dozen letters written for him. He's got terrible rheumatism in his fingers or arthritis. You'll be writing for him. And Hans agrees, and then at the end of the quote it says, his writing ability was dubious to say the least, but he considered himself lucky. He wrote the letters as best he could, while the rest of the men went into battle. None of them came back. And similarly, when Liesel is writing and reading in the basement at the end, it's what saves her from being killed as the rest of Himmel Street is killed. And Chloe touched a little bit on the way that words are positive between Max and Liesel. It says that Max's father was bonded to Hans through the accordion, but what bonds Max to Liesel, especially when he can't be there and all she has of him is the word shaker, are words themselves. The best word shakers were the ones who understood the true power of words. They were the ones who could climb the highest. One such word shaker was a small, skinny girl. She was renowned as the best word shaker of her region because she knew how powerless a person could be without words. I think the negative power of words is a little more implicit than the positive power, though. It kind of hangs over the entire story because even while she's learning all these things and she's getting excited about learning how to read and finding her voice, we have Mein Kampf hanging over the entire story. And even as Max says it's his savior, he also would never give that book to Liesel because he says it would be like giving it to a butcher. So even when we have all of that positive coming from it, it's almost like a dual-edged sword. And Liesel eventually comes to understand that negative power as well, and she sits on the floor of the mayor's library ripping up the books and she writes to the mayor's wife she wanted to kill the words because she realized how hurtful they could become. And then some of the quotes that I pulled out for the personification of words, I just touched on one. She tries to kill them. But my favorite one is when Max is painting over Mein Kampf to make the word shaker for her, and it says, there were the erased pages of Mein Kampf, gagging, suffocating under the paint as they turned. So here the words they're not just people, but they're people being killed. I would say as Mein Kampf led to some people being killed as well, so I liked that. And then I know Nikki's going to talk about, sorry if I give away your topic. Nikki's going to talk a little bit about it being essentially a young adult novel, or appropriate as a young adult novel. I'm a literature major, so this comes out naturally for me. I want to talk about it being essential as a book, as its primary medium, because it is a story for me about the power of words, so what better way to express that than through words themselves? And I would like to end with a quote. It's the very last line of The Book Thief, the one that Liesel writes. I have hated the words and I have loved them, and I hope I have made them right. The end.
Does anybody want to chime in on the power of a book about words?
To me, just go for it. Okay, thanks. To me, words themselves, and I don't know that you said this, are negative or positive. Words are power, language is power. But what I think, especially in this book, was how it was utilized to communicate. And I think the nature of communication you know, beyond written word, spoken word, musicality. I mean, to me, that was a focus. How people, it speaks to the social history, I mean, how people engaged. That's it.
Thank you. Yes, and then there's somebody up a little forward here. Did you want, okay, no. All right.
Just speaking to that a little bit, I wanted to say that reminded me of when she's reading to the townspeople, and it's kind of a solace to them, but they don't know what that book is. They probably aren't really listening to what she's saying. So it's not about what the words themselves are communicating, but how she's communicating to them. So that's kind of what makes them positive or negative, is how she's speaking back to them with the words.
Comment up here.
Thank you. I would just like to comment that I feel that in addition to words, music is also talked about in that way. And the power of music, that's another way people can communicate, and through the arts as well.
And we do have music and painting in her drawing. In the very back.
One of the things that has always shocked and puzzled me is how could this have ever happened in the first place? And I found it very revealing in the part when he was talking about words, and it's on page 445. It really kind of gave me a new perspective. It said, yes, the Fuhrer decided that he would rule the world with words. I will never fire a gun he devised. I will not have to. Still, he was not rash. Let's allow him at least that much. He was not a stupid man at all. His first plan of attack was to plant the words in as many areas of his homeland as possible. He planted them day and night and cultivated them, and he watched them grow until eventually great forests of words had risen throughout Germany. It was a nation of farmed thoughts. And I thought that was really, I mean, that was just so profound to me. I'd never really thought about it that way before, so.
I think we will move on to Albert.
Like every man, we see death as an allegorical personification of death. And symbolically, he enjoys devouring souls. They all taste different, you know, he enjoys them. But we find him humanized, we feel compassion towards him because he is forced into this situation. He's coerced. His indifference is a reaction to it. It's not his fault. And because of that, we sympathize with him, you know? And also through that, we begin to sympathize with the German people in the story. Because after all, we don't know, were they coerced? Were they active participants? Did they merely sit and watch? Colors play a big role symbolically in this novel. Death's denial of human misery draws a stark emblem of Nazism. And much like the German people who disagree with Hitler's violent anti-Semitism. So we see my task was to talk about symbolism and allegory, but as I read this book, everyone decided, oh, they enjoyed it or they didn't enjoy it. They couldn't put it down. It terrified me. It terrified me that this is a book directed towards young adults who, as Ms. Lopez mentioned, have no real connection to the Holocaust. In being raised in our society, which is very safe, and we have laws, and we have rules, and we have human rights, and we discuss things calmly, we don't understand what it's like to watch someone walk into a room and drag a woman out by her hair, or murder a child in the street, murder 10 children, murder 10,000. When you fictionalize something, it invariably becomes a story. And stories are safe. Stories aren't real. We can talk about stories. We can discuss them with our children. So now children can read about the Holocaust. And of course, it's not a definitive history. It's just a young adult novel to get them interested. Give them an introduction to it so they can begin to learn about it. As I drove here to school this morning, I heard a radio announcement for something called Gnomeo and Juliet, about two garden gnomes who fall in love. One's blue, he's a shaggy, rough and tumble man, looks like a porcelain Joe Biden with a pointed hat. And then you have a shapely, red-headed gnomette wearing a red dress, a young Sarah Palin, perhaps. And they all get along in what started as a tragedy about the death of two barely post-prepubescent teenagers. Tragic in its implications because it has a transpersonal dimension. Their death is not merely a shame, it's not merely a waste, it has a direct effect on everyone because of their stature in society. And now it's a love story about two plastic cartoon characters. And if they fall in love, they don't fall in love, one falls over and breaks, it doesn't matter. Everyone goes home. When you turn the Holocaust into a story, you're taking us one step closer for happening again. You're taking that visceral fear of it away. It's not something to be abhorred. It's not something to worry about. It's not something that when you look at it or think about it, you should weep. Your body should be racked. When I read this book, I was often nauseous because we are more concerned with the inner workings and group dynamics of a small family in a small town in this country besieged by a man who has poisoned them with words. Adolf Hitler couldn't stand outside of every gas chamber. Adolf Hitler couldn't run every train. People did that. And these people weren't merely misled by words. These people took action, they made choices. We are good, we are bad. But if we are mostly bad, and 6 million people have died as a result, it doesn't matter how good we were. Hitler loved dogs. So what? And there's a lot of allegory and symbolism in the book Thief. Of course, you have the accordion that lady mentioned in the back. It's symbolic of Hans when he's away, and it's symbolic of hope when he plays it and he breathes life into it. It's also symbolic of death after he's gone. It's the only thing Liesel takes from the house with her. After his Jewish friend dies, he can no longer play a note on it. And of course, the cover of the book. You have the dominoes. They symbolically represent the Holocaust, and they also foreshadow the fate of the town itself. You see that finger poised to start the chain reaction that will destroy it. Maybe it's just waiting for the word go. I don't know. That was a joke. Poor joke. Excuse me. So I do have a question. When speaking to people about this book, I heard the word brainwashed a lot. That Hitler brainwashed with Mein Kampf and his propaganda. And then I went online and I found it in numerous postings, which made me realize it wasn't an opinion, it was a platitude. Do you feel that Hitler was responsible through words for the actions of everyone else, and that wipes them clear of responsibility? Or let me pose you a simpler question. Do you feel that young adult literature fictionalizing the Holocaust is destructive or diminishing or reductive? Thank you very much.
Well, I'm not sure that Albert gave us one question. I think he gave us maybe like 6 or 7 questions. So we've got one all the way up here. I might just do this. No, okay, don't do that.
This kind of brings into something that many of you touched on, and one of the things that I think this book does is, and something that's fascinated me through a lot of literature, is that you have those who when you talk about the dichotomy between good and evil, I don't think it's that simple. I think there are people like Liesel who is very clearly someone who has a sensitivity and an awareness and chooses a certain humanistic path in her thinking and her actions. And then there were Nazis who were very actively what we would call evil, that with malice aforethought, they committed atrocities. And then someone along the way said that there's the vast majority of people that kind of were caught. And so we have a moral issue of what does it mean to be caught? And my suggestion is that we make ourselves unconscious. We go into denial. My book club is currently rereading something I read many, many years ago, A Prayer for Owen Meany, which I think is one of the most brilliant books of all time. And in it, Owen Meany says that if there weren't the draft, the vast majority of people would not have given a damn what happened in Vietnam. So if we think about the German people who went along, we have to think about morally ourselves and how much we raised a ruckus when we found we were not being threatened by Iraq, that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and how much have we allowed ourselves to think about the people that our bombs have killed and are killing that are innocent. And so I think the moral issues in this book, eventually that vast part of the population that doesn't take a stand but is able to avoid thinking about the fact that they're not taking a stand because it's very dangerous to take a moral stand. Thank you.
Yes?
And you're absolutely right. Is this back on? Think not just about action, but about inaction. Maybe in 3 generations, this book will be about a young girl in a small Iranian town who's devastated and doesn't understand why her village was bombed in retaliation for Israel being wiped off the map with a nuclear weapon. It's not just action, it's inaction, and you're absolutely right. Every one of our actions, we're all accountable. Yeah.
I found it interesting when you said that that you became nauseous in parts of the book. I was afraid to read the book because I know that any story about the Holocaust ought to be full of vivid descriptions of the cruelty inflicted, and that makes me nauseous. I shake, I become physically ill. So I was afraid to read it, but my daughter encouraged me, and so I did. And like the gentleman here who said that there wasn't enough of it, it wasn't as fully descriptive as what the Holocaust was really like. I was glad because I didn't have to throw the book across the room and, and not sleep for days. But the book wasn't really about the Holocaust. It was about it's about the individual people, and the shining part of it was their courage in the face of personal danger, when they fed the Jew, when they hid the Jew, and each and every step when they took a step of faith, acting on what they knew was right in their own conscience, rather than doing what was right rather than what was safe. That was the best part of the book.
All the way back here.
Excuse me.
I'd like to answer your question. Do you think it's destructive to write about the Holocaust? Absolutely not. I took my 2 oldest children to visit Auschwitz, and what you hear over and over from survivors and children of survivors, 2 words: never forget. And that's their goal. And whether it's fictionalized, I think one of the things that struck me when we visited Auschwitz, it shocked me more than anything, was, and if you've ever been, you're told from the time you entered until the time you leave, you're on very sacred ground, you're on a mass burial, to be respectful. You could hear a pin drop. And when we got to the back of the camp, there's a memorial to all the countries who lost citizens in the Holocaust. And there was a family there from our country behaving very disrespectfully, taking pictures, laughing, just I was very embarrassed. And I had hired the owner of a Jewish bookstore to take us, and his mother was a Holocaust survivor. And I said, I feel very embarrassed for my fellow countrymen. And he said, well, what you don't understand is that not everybody comes here to honor, some come to celebrate. And I just found that so shocking.
There's one right there.
To also address your question about using this type of novel to introduce youth who have never experienced the particular themselves, I mean, that's what art is all about, and it's most successful if it can communicate to people who haven't experienced something themselves and give them some sense of what it was and what it was about. And I think this novel achieves that goal. I'll throw back a question, though. I don't understand who decided that this should be called a young adult novel. I mean, some marketing person must have done that because they could probably sell it to the schools, but it is clearly an adult novel and everybody should read it.
Well, that is actually a very good comment for us to segue into our last talk, because Nikki is going to engage that topic.
I feel like a can of worms has been opened up, and it's my responsibility to try and address everything. So I'll try and hit everything we've talked about so far. But the reason why I stuck with the novel as young adult literature was because as I was researching and digging through background information on the novel, I was amazed at the unanimous response to the book, that it's an incredible young adult novel, and it deserves the attention of sophisticated teen and adult readers. And that is important that young adults read this. These are all quotes that I found online. And this grabbed me, not only as a literature major, but as an English education major. Why has this novel received so much success being marketed as a young adult book? And before I continue, I want to clarify what I mean when I say young adult literature. According to the American Library Association, young adult literature is marketed to 11 to 18-year-olds. And obviously, this is a very complex genre due to the wide age gap. There are huge differences in intellectual and emotional growth between, say, a fifth grader and a college freshman. Technically, The Book Thief is a combination of the young adult genres of realism, irony, problem, and history. It covers all of those. Realism, for it is a young adult fiction with a real-world setting in a historical period not far removed from our own, featuring a young protagonist overcoming a trial. And that's a definition given by Kenneth Donaldson, who's one of the leading young adult literature scholars. Young adult literature is the fastest-growing readership demographic, yet is largely misrepresented and misunderstood within the canon, even within our own society, although it composes 80% of literature read today. 80%. What is the attraction to young adult realism literature? What is the attraction to The Book Thief for teenagers? It's the tangible nature of the story. From characters to setting to dialogue, realist novels correspond to real life, giving the teen reader a chance to relate to the story and to extract thoughts, ideas, and emotions from the writing. Zusak's The Book Thief is a prime example of this. The protagonist, Liesel, is an ordinary person. She's not a hero. She's not a superhero. She's dealing with the reality of life in Nazi Germany. Liesel is dealing with the day-to-day and survival. Readers take comfort in knowing that they are not the only ones who suffer from inevitable circumstances. They're not the only ones that have to struggle day-to-day just to get by. The Book Thief contains round characters that are 3D and they're believable, with both good and bad traits. We talked about this, the duality of a lot of the characters, and it's not just black and white, in my opinion. There's so much intermingling. According to Donaldson, a good young adult problem novel has rich characterization with a balance of good and negative qualities. Liesel is not a typical protagonist. We see her struggle with her inner demons. We see her fight against those who love her. We see her choose to manipulate and purposefully harm and deceive the people in her life. Liesel is no noble hero, and she's no struggling do-gooder. She's just a girl being forced to deal with the reality of where she is, the reality of the demons of her past and present, and also the demons of her nation's past and her nation's present. Liesel is relatable to young readers. She's a hurting teen girl from a disjointed family. She's clearly imperfect. She's dealing with the consequences of her actions and struggling to be the person she wants to be. She's struggling to find out who she wants to be. Her realistic, relatable character for young adults is one reason why The Book Thief has been marketed as a young adult novel. Her family, too, is atypical. Her father, who's a foster father, is dually over and underworked. Her foster mother is borderline neurotic. And her birth father and mother are missing, and her brother is dead. And not to mention the Jew hiding in their basement. I mean, that's kind of a big deal. So for such a young girl, her responsibilities are humongous, and her emotional competence is far beyond her years. This is a realistic situation young adult readers can relate to. I mean, how many of us know a youth out there who's dealing with adult situations far, far too soon? The main conflict in The Book Thief occurs between the protagonist, Liesel, and the external world. She's struggling for survival, for victory, and for love. Liesel's dilemma involving fear, guilt, insecurities, these are all things young adults can relate to. What is adolescence besides a roller coaster of emotions and the constant battle against the outside world? The fact that Liesel, against such overwhelming odds, still manages to overcome them, a true comfort to young adults who are also facing various trials. Another key trait of young adult literature is the presence of a character who accomplishes something huge, something great. As Death tells us, Liesel was a girl with a mountain to climb. Donaldson says that this kind of change and growth is the most common theme appearing in young adult literature. It suggests the gaining of maturity, the coming of age. In The Book Thief, Liesel realizes the importance of familial solidarity. She learns to let go of her past, to forgive herself for surviving, and her family for the things that have happened, for the things they've gone through, and to embrace the ever-growing bond between herself, her family, and Max. The emotional struggles Liesel faces are common amongst teenagers today. The plot is not idealistic, it's realistic. Even though we hope for Liesel to come out on top, we know that she cannot. She cannot easily do so, because if she did, it would not be a realistic novel. It would lose its place in the young adult genre, if that's what happened. The first-person narration found in the novel transports the reader into the thoughts and feelings of Death, and through him into the thoughts and feelings of Liesel. Young adult literature is most often told from the perspective of a young adult. Seen through Death's eyes, a whole dimension is added to the characters, and there are no strictly good and bad people in real life, but combinations of combating natures and personas, as we've been talking about. The variety of characters and personalities in the novel provides universal appeal, a trait of a good young adult novel. Since all people can relate to at least one of the situations and characters presented, Zusak's novel is universally appealing. The theme of The Book Thief is worthwhile, leaving the reader pondering the various aspects of the story. There is now complexity to the German people of pre- and post-World War II, and to a degree, the characters are revealed as wounded, broken, and secure, with layers of pain from their own lives or homes, their own situations. Reading books about the Holocaust is beneficial to society, for it helps keep our consciences in tune, hopefully preventing such monstrosities from happening again. Just remember, the more aware we are as people of the atrocities of the past, the more sensitive we become to present-day prejudices. This is the aim of young adult books, to alter a person so deeply by the past their futures are altered as well. Young adult readers need books they can relate to, even in the realm of Holocaust literature. When it comes to Holocaust literature, Donaldson says most young adults seek out books about young people caught in the Holocaust because they are better able to identify with people their own age or slightly older. The Book Thief remains an effective piece for young adult readers. For a generation desperate for truth, struggling to find the meaning of life, The Book Thief displays truth about the human soul in a way that we cannot fully grasp in a lot of other novels. My question to you guys is, as we've been discussing, does being labeled young adult hinder Zusak's novel, and should the genre be changed? As you know, or some of you might not know, the book is in Europe and in Australia is labeled as an adult novel. There is no young adult genre there. But here it's marketed as a young adult novel, and therefore a lot of the aspects of it have been changed. The shocking part, the visceral effect that we've been talking about, has been softened a bit behind rhetoric, and it hides behind devices to soften the blow for the young readers. But the truth is still shocking, and the heroes are still there. They're atypical, but they're there. We don't have to be upset that we're not struck the same way, because it is, in America, a young adult novel. But again, my question, does this hinder the novel? Should we change it?
I see a question over there.
Excuse me.
Hi. Just today, when I came in, I hear somebody criticizing this book. Should this book be young adult? And I just want to tell you that one of the very first books that I ever read, I was born in Spain, and one of the very first books I read was Anna Frank. At the time, in Spain, we didn't know anything, or in my storybooks or at school, nobody ever mentioned, I didn't know anything about the Holocaust. That book that I read when I was 11 or 12 years old made me want to know more. I tried to find books about it. I'd asked my uncle to get me more books about the Second World War. I became fascinated by that. In those days in Spain, I wouldn't say that it was an anti-Semite country or people, but there were certain, just to give you an example, I think it was a bona fide mistake. People will say, pesa más que un judío muerto, referring to something that it was very heavy. It's heavier than a dead Jew. Referring to those Jews that die, before they started suffering hunger or whatever. And I don't think that people were, like I say, anti-Semite, but ignorance. Ignorance is what was having these people say comments like that. It changed me. It made me curious. I learned a lot about that. And when I came to America, I befriended a lot of Jewish people. And I think it made me a better person. And I think this is why I'm saying, oh my God, let young people read it. Because if it did this to me, I'm sure that I'm not the only one. A lot of people are going to be not only fascinated, but maybe will change a little bit. Will make them more compassionate about it. Okay.
The Journal of Anne Frank is an amazing piece of literature, and it's not fiction, and it wasn't written for children. It's the last account of a young girl being murdered by a force she cannot hope to oppose. And they weren't just murdering her in Amsterdam, they were also, over a period of years, systematically starving an entire people, not just Jews. And this young lady next to me, who is beautiful and brilliant and is my best friend and lover, I say that to qualify so you don't think I'm attacking her. She is the most compassionate person I know, much more so than myself. And she said, and this girl has stepfathers and parents, and her mother's neurotic, and she steals books, and not to mention there's a Jew in the basement, because it's a plot twist. It's a punchline. It's a joke. It's part of a story. It's not dangerous. It can be controlled, and we can understand it, and we can learn from it. You don't learn from 6 million people being murdered. You stay afraid that it happens again. You stay afraid that next time it's not you. That excuse me, I don't know why I said young lady, the nice woman in the back, when she says she was there at Auschwitz and she saw it, I'm sure she also saw the crates of children's shoes. If you can see that and you are not terrified and you're not disgusted and you are not so angry that you cannot stop shaking, you're not paying enough attention. And when we introduce children to this by having it be a backstory to a young girl's individuation is necessary and should be spoken of. Without constant individuation, we have no human progress. But it should not be the point of a story set in World War II Germany.
Okay, Albert, let me.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I don't mean to rail.
I was just going to say what the lady said. I do think that this type of literature, maybe not for 11-year-olds, I think a little bit older, I think the more education that's out there in anything, whether it be the Holocaust, whether it be Rwanda, whether it be AIDS, it causes someone to start thinking that something else has to be done. I do think that while this is fiction, this is a different perspective of Anne Frank, because up to this point, a lot of young people who read in high school, that is their only perspective of this. This is the opposite side. This is someone who wasn't involved, wasn't going to be carted away, but yet her daily life was affected by the fact that her country was falling down around her. I think that the more we try to hide from our children, and I also would like to put a plug in there for the good teachers, it would take a strong teacher to get a lot of these morals and values out of this. But I think under the right circumstances and the right teacher, I think this should be included. I think it should be kept as young literature.
But as the youngest person of the group, and still in high school, I'd like to comment upon how for my generation, and I'm right at the cusp of 18, so this literature is directed at us in America, is we're very desensitized to violence. We, you know, you turn on the TV, somebody's getting hit by a car, somebody's been shot, somebody's bleeding, you know, there's all these crime dramas. And even, I don't watch it, but maybe on ABC Family even, there's something called like Pretty Little Liars, and they lie about a friend's death, and it's very, we're not fazed by that much anymore. And so I think what Holocaust literature, not specifically perhaps this book, but just in general, what it does is it's almost a reminder of you don't understand how far this can go, how far human illiteracy to what can happen, what the cause and effect can really be. And I think that the message is getting harder and harder to tell because of this desensitization, that you don't understand what a life really is, because I mean, there are thousands of young people who do lose someone very dear to them through perhaps a violent act, or understand what it is to lose someone you know to disease. But the systematic elimination of a human being or a group of human beings is very different and very cold, and something we are experiencing in the world today, not in Germany, but in Africa and around the world. And so we, through our constant exposure to violence, may lose sight very easily of 100 men were killed in Sudan today. Well, that's just a number. But you have to realize that each person affects not just a microcosm, but a wave of other human beings who are, as Death would say, our narrator, have to stay behind.
Because this is exactly what I was hoping would happen, that we would have a very stimulating conversation. But our time is up. So I do believe that that conversation can continue in a more casual way. But I am going to, as a good moderator, draw our program to a close. But let me first ask you all to join with me in thanking our panel. For preparing talks that stimulated your provocative and thoughtful responses, and so I also applaud you. And I hope you will continue to come to the next upcoming One Book programs that will be. Again, as you are leaving, I will repeat the dates. February 16th, Cook Library, 3 p.m. February 21st, Sarasota High School Auditorium, 6:30 p.m.